Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of Baal and the ancient cult, the religion the Old Testament most feared. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. The Hebrew Bible mentions the worship of Baal over 90 times, always as the great enemy of the God of Israel, the religion that led the Israelites into apostasy, the cult whose prophets were slaughtered by Elijah on Mount Carmel. For centuries, scholars assumed Baal worship was a primitive superstition. Then archaeologists excavated Ugarit and found the texts of Baal's religion, and discovered it was one of the most sophisticated theological systems of the ancient world. What those texts revealed transformed biblical scholarship. Baal was not a minor local fertility idol. He was the king of the gods, the lord of storms and rain, the deity who battled chaos and death to make the world habitable, a figure whose mythology parallels the Hebrew Bible's accounts in ways that are impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The evidence now suggests that early Israelite religion was not monotheistic from the beginning, but emerged from a polytheistic environment in which Yahweh and Baal were competing storm gods. The question this raises about the origins of Western monotheism is one that mainstream biblical scholarship has been grappling with for 50 years. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the wider world of ancient technological anomalies, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. The official story of technological progress follows a reassuring arc: stone tools giving way to bronze, bronze to iron, iron to steel, and finally, the Industrial Revolution catapulting humanity into the modern age. In this narrative, each generation inherits a slightly more sophisticated toolkit than the last, and no knowledge is ever truly lost. It is a comfortable story. It is also, in key respects, demonstrably false. History is littered with technological achievements that appeared centuries before their supposed invention, vanished after the cultures that created them collapsed, and were reinvented, often with great difficulty, by later civilizations who had no idea the knowledge had ever existed. Roman concrete was stronger and more durable than most modern concrete, and was not matched again until the 21st century. Greek fire, the incendiary weapon that protected the Byzantine Empire for centuries, has never been fully reproduced. Damascus steel, capable of holding an edge that modern metallurgists struggle to replicate, disappeared with the craftsmen who made it. These are not myths. They are documented historical losses of genuine technical knowledge. When we encounter an object from the ancient world that should not exist, a battery from Baghdad dated to the Parthian era, a computing mechanism salvaged from an ancient shipwreck, a map showing geographical features that were not officially discovered for another millennium, the temptation is to dismiss it as misidentified or misstated. That dismissal is sometimes warranted. But when such objects accumulate, when the pattern becomes too consistent to ignore, the honest response is to ask whether our model of ancient capability is simply wrong. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding Baal and the ancient cult, the religion the Old Testament most feared, is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. The Baal cycle, a collection of mythological texts describing the exploits of the storm god Baal, was discovered at Ugarit in northern Syria between 1929 and 1939. Ugarit was a Bronze Age city-state that flourished from approximately 1400 to 1200 BC before being destroyed, leaving its clay tablet archive sealed beneath the ruins. The tablets are dated to the 14th and 13th centuries BC. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes, but as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the Baal cycle texts describe Baal as the son of the high god El, who is also the generic Semitic word for God and appears throughout the Hebrew Bible. Baal battles Yam, the god of the sea and chaos, and Mot, the god of death, establishing his kingship over the cosmos in a mythological pattern structurally similar to creation narratives in several other ancient Near Eastern traditions. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine. The Hebrew Bible records a dramatic confrontation in 1 Kings 18 between the prophet Elijah and 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. The contest involves competing sacrifices to determine whose deity will send fire. Baal's prophets fail. Elijah's sacrifice is consumed by fire from Yahweh. The prophets of Baal are then killed. The episode is presented as the definitive proof of Yahweh's superiority over Baal. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation. But the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, the name Baal simply means Lord or Master in Semitic languages and was used as a title for multiple different deities across the ancient Near East. Baal-Hadad was the primary storm deity of Canaan and Syria. Baal-Hamon was the chief deity of Carthage in North Africa, a different figure associated with agriculture and sacrifice. Baal-Peor was a Moabite deity mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. Conflating these distinct figures is a persistent source of confusion. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of Carthage, founded by Phoenician colonists from the Levant in the 9th century BC, worshipped Baal, Hamon as its chief deity. Archaeological excavation of the Tophet, a sacred precinct at Carthage, found thousands of urns containing cremated remains, primarily of infants and young children, along with votive inscriptions to Baal Hamon and Tanit. The interpretation of these remains as evidence of ritual child sacrifice has been one of the most contested questions in ancient Mediterranean archaeology. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding. Mark Smith's 2001 work, The Origins of Biblical Monotheism, synthesized decades of comparative Ugaritic and biblical scholarship. to argue that early Israelite religion was polytheistic, including veneration of the goddess Asherah alongside Yahweh, and that the sharp distinction between Yahweh and Baal developed gradually through a long historical process rather than being present from the beginning of Israelite religious history. This position is now mainstream in academic biblical studies. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations. And in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain Baal and the ancient cult, the religion the Old Testament most feared. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that Baal worship was largely identical to early Israelite religion. Yahweh and Baal were both storm god titles applied to a common divine figure in the early Levantine religious environment, and the distinction between them was constructed retrospectively by later monotheistic editors of the biblical text. This is Mark Smith's influential position, broadly accepted in academic biblical studies. Orthodox religious communities reject this interpretation as incompatible with the Bible's theological claims. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that Carthaginian child sacrifice to Baal Hammon is a historical fact confirmed by archaeological and literary evidence, including Diodorus Siculus, Plutarch, and the physical evidence of the Tophet. Lawrence Stager and Samuel Wolfe argued in a 1984 paper that the cremated infant remains at Carthage represent genuine ritual sacrifice. This interpretation is contested by scholars who argue the Tophet was a natural infant burial ground rather than a sacrifice site. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the child sacrifice attributed to Baal worship in the Hebrew Bible and in Greco-Roman sources represents a specific Carthaginian practice that was misapplied by ancient polemicists and modern popular writers to all Baal religion across the ancient world. Canaanite Baal Hadad worship, the religion actually in competition with Yahwism in biblical texts, involved no child sacrifice and bears little resemblance to the Carthaginian Baal Hammon cult. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding Baal and the ancient cult, the religion the Old Testament most feared, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes the Ugaritic Baal cycle texts, catalogued as KTU 1 through 6, are translated and published in critical editions by Frank Moore Cross, Cyrus Gordon, and others. They provide direct access to the theology against which Israelite religion defined itself. The structural parallels between the Baal cycle and biblical passages, particularly the Psalms and sections of Job, are extensive enough to have generated a substantial academic literature on direct literary borrowing. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented isotope analysis of cremated remains from the Carthage Tafet, published in 2010 in the journal P. Low S1, found that a significant proportion of the remains were from fetuses or perinatal infants who died at or before birth from natural causes. The study's authors argued this was inconsistent with systematic child sacrifice and more consistent with a burial ground for infants who died naturally. Proponents of the sacrifice interpretation dispute the study's conclusions. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed Hebrew inscriptions from Kuntalit Ajrud and Kerbet El-Kam, both dated to the 8th century BC, refer to Yahweh alongside Asherah, a Canaanite goddess also associated with Baal's religi. Uz environment. These inscriptions provide direct epigraphic evidence of polytheistic practice within ancient Israel during the period when the biblical narrative presents the Elijah-Baal confrontation, confirming that the biblical account reflects a contested religious environment rather than a uniformly monotheistic Israelite society. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding Baal and the ancient cult, the religion the Old Testament most feared. Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. Mark Smith's work on early Israelite polytheism is now standard curriculum in academic biblical studies and ancient Near Eastern religion programs. The Ugaritic texts transformed scholarly understanding of Canaanite religion and its relationship to the Hebrew Bible. The Carthage Tafet debate continues, with new analyses regularly producing competing conclusions. The competition between Yahweh and Baal worship is now understood as a long historical process that shaped the development of monotheism over centuries, not a simple theological binary that existed from Israel's beginnings. The Baal cycle texts are freely available in translation and are studied alongside the Hebrew Bible in comparative religion courses worldwide. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of Baal and the ancient cult, the religion the Old Testament most feared, from the historical record, through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Baal ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please subscribe to the channel. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment below telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.